So today we're really going to be talking about the essentials. Um, y- I love to go into I love to go into deep 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 concepts and theories, but I think it's always good to start from the from the very essential, from the base, have a foundation that we can build things on. So it's really a pleasure for me to spend time with you this morning going over these topics. Now, for a bit about me, my name is Ihan Yobasi, and as Michael said, I'm a solutions architect in the TD SYNNEX Center of Excellence. Now, we covered the entire EMEA. So, what we typically take requests from partners like yourselves, and based on your requirements, we help to work through pre-sales requests. We can also provide professional services or training where required. My my main areas are focus on security, and I do networking for fun. But my main areas of expertise are in security and networking. I'm based in the UK, and when I'm not cracking my brain over something, something difficult, then I'll be cooking or outdoor cycling. So that's a bit about me. Now, I know some of us have come from different locations, so if you don't mind, it'll be nice to just to see in the chats where you're joining from. I always like to get a good feel of where people are joining from, your roles, and something that's always important to me are your goals for this session, what you came in mind for, and what's your hunger for joining this session. So while we go through, it'll be nice to have that, to see see that posting up in the chat, and I'm sure Michael is going to Michael, please, if you don't mind keeping an eye on that,
Of course.
that would be fantastic. Um, so while you do that, um, your name, your role, um, called country you're joining from, but most importantly, your goals for this session, what you really want to take home from here, or if you're at home, what you want to take away from this session. So the other thing I want us to begin with is a bit of a thought exercise. Anyone who's been on a session with me, I always like to provoke a bit of thought around, before we begin an exercise. So this thought exercise is going to be based on a famous quote. Welcome, Sammy. All right, very good. Okay, okay. Well, if you're working on AI and chatbots, just good news for you. I'm a real person. So, um, but yeah, please feel free to let us know what your main areas are, because I would like to hit on those points that you really want to gain from here. Now, thought exercise I also want to put across to everyone is based on this famous quotes. Um, there is there are two um, things that are certain in this life: death and taxes. Um, Now, I would like you to take that quote and make your own famous quote. But your quote will go something like this: there are two things that are certain in IT: what and what. All right. So now, while you're introducing yourselves, and just say welcome, Kenneth and Alexander. Yeah, definitely looking to meet your goals for this session. Um, I want you guys to also focus on, just have it. They're not right or wrong answers, but just put up in the chat what your thoughts are around this. There are two things that are certain in IT: what and what. I want to get what your views are. Okay, always search and research. Very good. Always DNS and printers that causes errors. Yeah, that's yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah, search and research. Last week I spent some time with some teaching some cadets, and um, searching to them is Google. Outside Google, they have no other concept of what a search engine is. Mm. There are two things that are certain in 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 this life and in IT, and Alexander said bugs and user errors. All right, fair enough. Fair enough. Mm. Anyone else with some nuggets of wisdom that we can take away? Okay. So for me, if I was going to put two things, which I think are certain in IT, it would be and the next one would be Sammy said changes and outages. Fair enough. Yeah. Um, but for me, because of because of my bias and my leaning towards security, I feel like those two things will always be certain in our field of IT. There will always be data, and more data and more data, and there will always be a need for securing it one way or the other. Um, and that's my story, and that's what I'm going to run with. But for you folks as well, I think you also have some valid ones to go in your quotes. We'll see who becomes famous at the end of this. So here's a bit of our agenda and what we're going to cover. Now, somewhere in the middle of this presentation, I'm going to talk about how the just a thought process for identifying security requirements. And we'll round up by looking at Microsoft cybersecurity reference architecture. This is something I I always like to start with. And anyone who's done a presentation with me will know I typically start with this reference architecture. And in this in and but before then, we will look at general security concepts, because those come into how we think about that reference architecture, and make it meaningful and useful to us. So I think Sammy had a question, Michael, about getting a transcript at the end of this meeting.
Will we be able to get the whole transcription after this meeting ends? That's a really good question, Sammy. I guess if we do have it, of course, then we'll provide it to you.
Oh, okay. So that's one of the Well, Sammy, I think that's one of the disadvantages of working with a real person. You never know whether you're going to get a transcript or not. I think chatbots are more guaranteed to give you a transcript, but we'll see what we can work on that. So let's begin by looking at our security concepts. Now, first one and most famous, right at the top of the list of all of them to get the basics on, is what we call the CIA triad. Now, we're not talking about the CIA, we're talking about the Americans here, where we're talking about the security concept of security pillars of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, why should we care about these three things? It's because these are basic tenets of security, and usually they're always the goal. When you go right to the base of it, any security concern or initiative, it's usually to serve one of these three pillars. So if we think about encryption, encryption technologies are mainly for preserving confidentiality. If we think about things like If you think about things like secure email is also combining privacy, which is confidentiality, and integrity. Um, and when we have a security incident, it's usually involves a breach of one or more of these security pillars. So, for example, your company, one of your customers suffers a denial of service attack, a DDoS attack. I think recently we heard about the HTTP2 vulnerability that caused many that caused CDNs, other companies to see huge amounts of, well, not necessarily huge amounts of traffic, but actually it was a layer 7 vulnerability that was causing their servers to run out of resources. And that's that denial of service is basically broke the availability of their systems. And so a lot of these, we may look at that from more of a IT operations perspective, but it's also a security issue as well. And so whenever we talk about the CIA triad, we're really talking about the very, very basics of why security even exists in the first place. There's one other, and depending on the field that you work with, there's one more that we can add to the mix. And for folks who work in in industries with highly sensitive information, like dealing with classified information, there's also the concept of non-repudiation. And non-repudiation basically means that if I take an action, I cannot deny that I have taken an action or made a change or sent some information. Non-repudiation means that my actions cannot be refuted by me. So for people who work with customers that have that deal with highly sensitive information and really need to provide proof of actions, non-repudiation also then becomes part of the triad, and then it changes from being a CIA triad to another term which we call CAIN. So still preserving confidentiality, availability, integrity, but also adding non-repudiation as well as a requirement. So another concept to think about is what we call the attack kill chain, which was produced by Lockheed Martin, and I need to actually mention them because they copyrighted this. I have to say that, otherwise I'm going to prison. But Lockheed Martin produces to show the sequence, or those steps that are typically carried out by an adversary before they achieve their objectives on a target. Now, those objectives may vary, but what we tend to see similar patterns or combination of steps, similar steps or combination of steps that those adversaries go through. And if they're starting from they're starting from outside the organization, even if they're starting from inside, there's usually a period of reconnaissance where they're learning about their targets. And then there's a point where they have to figure out their attack vector, and then they have to weaponize that attack, their payload or their exploits. And of course, they have to deliver that exploits, deliver their payload, run that payload, and then once they run their payload, they want to achieve persistence. If they achieve persistence, that means they can actually go back into that environment again and again. It's like getting a golden ticket, so they can always go back to that environment. And usually they'll try more than one means of achieving persistence. Maybe they'll create an account and they'll leave a network connection open, but usually they'll want to have more than one means of having a foothold in that environment. And when they do that, they can move. They can then move laterally, within the environment, establish their command and control, and then they can start doing other things like escalating privileges, um, doing things like data exfiltration, and so on and so forth. So the attack kill chain. The one picture I'm showing on screen is actually a more stretched out process. The attack kill chain it's a bit more. The original attack kill chain developed by Lockheed Martin is actually a bit more simple than this, but this is a much more elaborate process that takes all other steps into account. Now, a simplified example of this is where you have an external attacker with a breached account. They can, with that breached account, they can use that to elevate their privileges. For example, they have, they've been able to buy a user account from the dark web, from an access broker. They bought a user account, and with that user account, they're able to log into into an Office 365 account, and using that account, they can request for more privileges. Impersonating that user, they can request for more privileges, elevating their privileges, and then do things like exfiltrating access, finding where the data is stored, and then start copying that out, which is what we call data exfiltration. It could even be worse than that. They could actually go further than that and delete the information if they have true malicious purposes. But we don't only see this with external adversaries. We can also see this as the actions of a malicious insider as well, because we know when people are unhappy within an organization, they can also work in similar ways. So this is really a more simplified attack model. But when we think about the attack kill chain, it actually helps us think about what could somebody external to our organization do, and also what can someone internal to our organization also do. Now, the MITRE ATT&CK framework is created by MITRE, which is an organization, a non-profit organization, and what they do is they collected lots of information from the industry about the tactics, the techniques, procedures that are used in the wild for different kinds of attack campaigns. So they have what is called the MITRE ATT&CK framework. They have an enterprise version, which is the most popular one, and I just want to show it up on the screen so that folks can actually see that it's a website that you can browse to and have a look at, which I encourage folks to actually have a look at in their spare time. So I'm just going to change my screen here. I'm just going to show that quickly. Yeah, I can't resist doing a demo. That's all right. Michael, I believe this should be visible now to folks.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. So this is the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and if you notice, the tactics are, so what you see here is that at the top of the it's a matrix, and at the top of the matrix, the tactics are what you would see in bold at the top of the matrix, and they are very similar to what you find on the attack kill chain. But the MITRE ATT&CK framework goes a lot further, and then it actually lists the kinds of techniques that you see under those tactics. For example, we talk about reconnaissance. What kinds of techniques do people use for reconnaissance? And we have those kinds of techniques here: active scanning, gathering victim host information, gathering your network information. If you're the target, your adversary will gather your network information. Things like searching open databases. These are things that attackers would do when they're researching your organization or your customers' organizations. And this is like the beauty of the MITRE ATT&CK framework, is that it helps us think about what an attacker would do, if they wanted to target our environment, if our environment was their target. And when we think about these techniques, we can then look into, so opening each of these techniques will give you the different procedures that they can go through. And doing this helps us just think about how to defend, because we need to know how we can be attacked to figure out how to defend better. So anyone who's thinking about a security assessment or a penetration test, needs to actually look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework. It's almost become the de facto standard when we think about attack frameworks. There are others in the industry, but the MITRE ATT&CK framework has really become the most popular. Okay, so demo time over. Back to my slide deck. All right, am I back on the slides now?
Yep.
Perfect. Right. So with that in mind, we've looked at how the attacks, how we think about attacks in the industry, and what people typically refer to when they're thinking about how attacks, the techniques and tactics and procedures that attackers go through. Now, what can we do to defend, right? What can we do as defenders? Now, one of the most popular defense strategies out there is called defense in depth. And it's really a security strategy that involves arranging our security controls. So those are different defensive measures. So security control, for example, would be like deploying EDR, for example, or having a perimeter firewall, or using a VPN to encrypt, using encryption in our VPNs. These security strategies are deployed to avoid single points of failure. So for example, if I think about my infrastructure as an onion, so if you look at this diagram, you think about it like an onion. We have different layers around that onion. Every layer will have a security measure. Every layer will have a defense measure. Every layer will have a security control. And if the security control at one layer fails, the security control at the next layer should be able to take over and provide, some level of protection. And every, the security of the entire system, of your entire system, is dependent on on the measure of security that each part produces. So, the strength of your entire system is really based on all the individual security controls that you have. And really, one of the beautiful goals of having defense in depth is that it slows down attackers, and it should slow them down enough so that it gives you time to win in your defense. If you deploy only one security control and an attacker breaks through that, then they're just close enough to achieve their objective. But if you have 10 different security controls, they have to get through the first one, then they run to the second one, then they run into the third one, and it slows them down. So hopefully you can detect them at some point and then be able to evict them from your environment. And that's what defense in depth is. That's one of the things that defense in depth is meant to achieve. One of the findings in when environments were tested for security is that most in traditional environments, they would have like one or two security controls, perimeter firewall, a host, maybe host antivirus. And attackers know that once they breach through that, that perimeter firewall, the rest of the network is, is easy pickings for them. But when we think about defense in depth, we'll try to slow them down. If they get through a firewall, well, they need to figure out ways to evade, EDR. If they evade EDR, they need to think about application whitelisting. If they evade application whitelisting, they need to think about data loss prevention. All those things slow them down. And if you're monitoring all those layers, then you can you have a much higher chance to succeed. All right. So so I mentioned a few here. At the network, traditional perimeter a control will be something like a firewall of some sort with IDS, IPS, web application firewall. At the host, of course, we're thinking about EDR. These days, we're at the network, we could also add things like analytics as well. I hope my handwriting is clear enough. At the application layer, we could have things like whitelisting. So application whitelisting, something like App Locker, which is something that you can turn on Windows Professional. You can just turn that on. It's already built in. And your data, you're looking at things like DLP, and I could go on and on. But thinking about this, that what layer, what control can I apply at different layers, helps you to win. Now, why do we need defense in depth? Well, I mentioned that attackers find it easier to achieve their objectives when there are fewer security controls, and it's easy in modern environments to have a hybrid setup where you have a cloud component in addition to an on-prem component. And what an attacker can find is that they can start from the most vulnerable component, whether that be the cloud, and they can use that to pivot into the on-prem environment, or they can start from the on-prem environment, compromise the on-prem environment, and then pivot into the cloud. So taking a defense in-depth approach just allows us to make sure that if there's a breach anywhere, it will slow down the spread of that attack as well. All right. So as an example here, this could be where a user, for example, receives an email and clicks on a malicious URL, and then they're exploited in that their systems are exploited in that process. With things, having different controls at different points in that environment. So having let's say Defender for Office 365 helps limit the spread of that attack. And if there is a bypass to that, if that person's Defender for some reason it's not picked up by Defender for Office 365, that exploit can be stopped from running by Defender for Endpoint. But let's say for some reason Defender for Endpoint does not pick that up on the host. Let's say the attacker wants to try to pivot across the network. They want to compromise Active Directory, or they want to escalate their privileges in Azure AD. Having another security control over there, maybe something like Defender for Identity or Azure Active Directory Identity Protection, helps to pick up the attack on that layer. And if they try to exfiltrate data as well, Defender for Office 365 can pick that up. Even Defender for Cloud Apps can pick that up. And so having our different controls really helps to slow down attacks. All right. So if you have any questions about that, please post that in the chat. I'm always happy to elaborate on these things. While we soak up defense in depth, another concept to cover is the concept of zero trust. Now, Zero Trust is, so defense in depth is a security strategy. Zero Trust is another security strategy, and they're complementary to each other. And it's Zero Trust is real. It's it's hard stuff. It's not just, it's more than a buzzword. It's a real strategy. Like in 2021, the US government issued an executive order for to protect their their national cybersecurity infrastructure, and Zero Trust was one of their core strategies for securing their their infrastructure, their and all across their organizations. Government organizations need to comply with this executive order. Microsoft has been heavily involved in developing the principles, the concepts, and the solutions around Zero Trust, and they have published documentation around this. I put a screenshot showing the Zero Trust business plan that they have, for leaders, and this is because when it's strategy, you need to talk about the cost of it as well. So Zero Trust is, and it's something that we need to, it's not going anywhere anytime soon, and something we need to pay attention to and understand what it means and how to use it. So let me just spend some time explaining. So Zero Trust really is an approach to security that allows us to secure your data, your apps, or your devices anywhere on the network. Typically, we have traditional networks that were flat, and once you went beyond the perimeter security, everything was accessible. I remember speaking to going for training. Wasn't a training, it was an event. I remember meeting a lady who used to just hack for fun, and she told me how she used to get into bank. I mean, she's working in the security industry now, but before that, she was just a fun hacker, and she would get into she would be able to get into breach like bank security systems, and once she's beyond their firewall, she can reach everything. I mean, she was surprised about that, but that was what it was like before. Now, when we move to a more to an architecture that's built around Zero Trust, we are trying to protect those assets from each other. We're protecting our assets from each other. We're not protecting our assets from the outside. We're actually protecting our assets from each other, because anyone could be compromised within that network. And so that's why there's some principles, some interesting principles that go along with in a Zero Trust environment. So one of those principles is to verify explicitly. We have a policy that tells us to always authenticate and authorize our users, our devices, our applications, based on data points. So what kind of data points am I referring to? Things like, what IP address are they coming from? That's a data point. What geolocation are they signing in for? That's another data point. My policy should be able to evaluate those data points. Another data point is what version of what operating system are they using? What version are they using? What is their compliance? What's the level of compliance of their device? These are things that so that kind of information you can get from Intune. That's a signal you can get from Intune. And so based on that information, I can make certain decisions as to whether to authorize them or not. Another thing is to use least privilege access with just-in-time, just enough access. And that allows us to limit reduce the risk of privilege escalation in my environment. It's not a case of gone are days of once admin, always admin. Now the time is admin just when you need it and just for the amount of time that you need it for. And of course, just enough just enough access. I don't give you admin privileges that are beyond what you need. So the last principle there is assuming breach. So we're assuming that anyone on the network could be breached. So we have to always segment our networks and make sure that different areas of our network do not need to talk to each other if they don't have to. And that involves creating micro segmentation policies, using end-to-end encryption, and always using analytics of our traffic to detect any threats. Microsoft takes these principles really really seriously, and that's why they have built some tools. I'll give an example of some of the tools that that we use that are available to implement these zero trust principles. Like for Verify explicitly, we can use things like conditional access. Conditional access is a very, very important tool in our arsenal. And to anyone, I recommend, if you haven't, well, if you're using your security defaults, that's good. But if you have conditional access, enabled, you should definitely look at the kind of policies that you can implement to give you a way to actually supercharge your security. So you can choose to allow people based on their IP address, their location, and if based on signals that you even get from Azure Identity Protection as well, if you have the licensing for that. For least privileged access, we have just-in-time tools, things like privileged identity management. We have privileged identity management also allows us to provide just enough access. Another tool that we have for just enough access is Entra permissions management. So for those of you who may or may not know, Microsoft acquired a company, I think it's almost getting to 2 years ago, and last year that called CloudKnox. Last year, that product was renamed Entra Permissions Management, and it's used to limit the permissions that our users have. And then to minimize our blast radius, segmenting our network, we have things like if you're in Azure, you have things like network security groups. We also have, for analytics, we also have our traffic analytics as well, which we can also use within Azure. So we have the tools for this. We need to use those tools, using things like VPC flow, turning on VPC flow logs, and using that. We can use that to actually get that kind of visibility. So zero trust, based on those principles, we can actually put zero trust within our architecture. And for people who want to go deeper into this, there are actually publications that advise on this. So the screenshot on the right is a publication by NIST around the zero trust architecture based on these principles. Even for folks like me who are based in the UK, our National Cybersecurity Center also has zero trust architecture design principles available as well. Now, I'm sure your national security agencies will have very similar stuff created as well. And I'll suggest you actually look into it if you're curious, and you'd see these principles really have been universally accepted. So I have a question for you folks, and I'd like you to actually put it in the chat. Now, what tools do you have in your environment? Because I mentioned some tools that we can use to operate on zero trust principles. And I'm wondering, what tools do you have in your environment that help you operate on zero trust principles? And you can type that in the chat. It will be interesting to see what you are using. I've mentioned some. If you're using them, you can also type that in the chat as well. But it'll be interesting to see what you're using. I always like to see what people are using, and actually see what's happening out there in the industry. Okay, I'll give a minute to think about it. No one using conditional access? Oh, well, if anything comes to mind, put that in the chat. It will be good to actually see what you're using out there. I'm going to move on to the next section. So identifying security requirements is important because everything we do in our environment requires security. Folks at Microsoft recognize that, and that's why they, with every product that they create, there's always some security guidance to go along with that. So whether you're a developer or you work in support or you work in sales, it's important to think about what the security requirements of whatever product you're creating or you're selling or you're recommending. And these are a few questions to think about. What are the goals or objectives of what you're using? And this, you can apply this in general. It's not necessarily a technical thing, but these are just questions that we should ask. Like, what are the goals that you're trying to achieve, and how do they need to be protected? How do those goals and objectives, how do they need to be protected? Now, why are you using this this product? What are your risks? What are your motivations for it? And then that can help you think about, okay, when you think about the risk, it can also help you think about, okay, how you can properly secure it as well. What are you trying to do at that with that product or at that layer? And if you think about what you're trying to do, if you think about that in a process-driven way, you can also think about how you can secure it better. And the people within your organization, think about who is involved, and thinking about the people also helps you think about their security as well. Where are you going to be doing it? So think about security of the locations as well, and when are you going to be doing it? So think about whether you need security at all the whether you need to take controls at a certain time or you need to have it always on. So these are really simple questions, but actually thinking about this helps us to build our security much better. Now I'm going to round up by looking at the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architecture, and just some thoughts around. There's lots of Microsoft security solutions, a lot of them, and the architects at Microsoft, there were two of them basically who worked on creating this, but they try to put all their security products within a single slide, and this is a lot to look at. It's a lot to digest, but there is a way to think about this, and the reason I'm actually presenting it to you folks is so that you can think about it in a simple way, because everyone actually needs something. If you're in Microsoft's ecosystem, you actually need something from this slide. You may not need everything, but you're going to need something. And so how we can think about it is to look at things in another way. Let's think based on our strategic initiatives. And usually when you have a security project or program in when you or one of your customers have a security project or program, you can usually break it down into one of four areas. It's either, and the folks at Microsoft did some research around this, and it was the folks at Forrester who did research, and they published this. You can break it down into four areas: productivity, security, or you would hear user access, security operations, data center services and API, and then operational technology. So anything involving OT and IoT. You'd usually find it broken down into one of these four areas. So let's look at our reference architecture again. A lot of stuff to look at. And then let's think about it based on our security initiatives. So if you take that cybersecurity reference architecture and you break it down, productivity, security, you see that you need a subset of these solutions for things around user access, productivity, security. And you can see where you need software as a service, you need to secure your devices, you need Intune. For your endpoint, you need things like Microsoft Defender for endpoint. For your identity and access, of course, you need Azure Active Directory with conditional access, so you can have MFA. You also need privileged identity management. Of course, your information protection, you need your solutions like Purview. And this is part of the cybersecurity reference architecture, but it just helps you see the products that you actually need to be thinking about. Oh, do I need this? Oh, do I need this? Oh, do I need that? It just tells you what section of the supermarket to go to when you're shopping for solutions. In the same way, you also have modern security operations, and this is dealing with our detection tools. So things like our Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Cloud, Defender for Identity, Defender for Cloud Apps, and then our monitoring and orchestration tool, which is Microsoft Sentinel. So we have our XDR solutions, right? And then we have Sentinel to provide that monitoring, orchestration of our response. And then if we look at our data center services and API, you see that we have Defender for Cloud that provides us with security posture management as well. And of course, we have Azure Active Directory. We have our GitHub security for secure development. And we also have security that's also built into Windows 10 and Windows 11 that we can work with. So when we take the cybersecurity reference architecture as strategic initiatives, which your requests usually fall into, you can break them down and then you can bring it back together again. And that's what gives us this whole plethora of solutions that we can think about when we're looking for solutions. So always when you think about it, when you're thinking about what security solutions do you need for Microsoft security, think about your initiatives and then zoom in on those initiatives from the cybersecurity reference architecture. And that starts to give you a clear picture of what you may need for your solutions. So my final thoughts on this is that we can win at security. It's not an impossible job. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing it. But to win at security, we need to get familiar with those security concepts and the different strategies and approaches that we have for security. We need to think seriously about implementing zero trust within our environment, zero trust principles, and using the tools that we have available. Some of those tools are just right there, waiting for you to use them. Also, keep an eye on Microsoft Security. They release lots of products and features, so keep an eye out on that. And of course, at TD SYNNEX, we're here to help you with your security journey. So reach out to us where you have these security initiatives that you're trying to implement. Reach out to us, and we can help have that discussion and then guide you along that journey. So that's what I have to share today. Just want to say thank you very much for your time.